loaded up and ready to go here, and to dive into a discussion on grandparenting. And let's go around and meet our panel members, and then we're going to dive into this discussion on grandparenting today. Now, I'm delighted, and the audience should be delighted that I've got a co-host today. What that means is that hopefully I'm not going to talk as much as I usually do. Let's meet my co-host first, and then we'll meet Deanna and Jerry. Kerry Byrne, tell me I didn't mispronounce your name.
Did not. It's amazing.
Good.
Everyone does. I've been called Bernie my whole life, Kerry Byrne.
Well, I've been called Gurney my whole life, and I'm still being called Gurney. But Kerry, we had a great discussion with you last year, and you are the one who introduced me to Deanna and Jerry. For those who did not tune into that discussion, Kerry is the founder of the Long Distance Grandparent. And let's see, I think I've got your website all loaded up here. If you go to longdistancegrandparent.com, you can learn more about what Kerry does and her organization. But Kerry, tell us a little bit about your story and what led to you starting this organization.
Well, first of all, thank you, Steve, for having us all here together. I'm delighted to be a co-host. It was a pleasure to be with this community last year alongside Donnie Davis from Gaga Sisterhood. Anyhow, so I started the Long Distance Grandparent really based on some of my professional interests. I've been a research scientist in the area of aging, care, and connection for almost 25 years now. And then I became a mother. And I always say that I birthed 6 long-distance grandparents at that time. And we got transferred to Dubai early in my first son's life when he was 2. And it was a gut-wrenching decision to move, to leave Toronto, Ontario, because we just gotten back and we were kind of sort of closer to my parents. And then we got transferred to Dubai. And it was just through that experience that I committed to making sure that, my children would know their grandparents. And so I started the Long Distance Grandparent to make sure that grandparents would know their grandchildren no matter the distance between. And I have been working on that ever since. I've got an online membership, and I send out weekly newsletters with tips and ideas to stay connected. And I see some familiar faces popping up in the chat here. So thank you, Long Distance Grandparents, for being here. When I met Jerry and Deanna, and I know they'll talk about the book that they wrote, but reading their book, I thought of Steve immediately and had to connect them. And so here we are.
Oh yeah, no, and thank you. We had a connection, and I was like, I need to get you all on as soon as possible. So we made that happen here. So all right, I want to go to Deanna next, and then we'll finish with Jerry, and then we'll dive in to the discussion. So Deanna, tell us a little bit about your background. And now, Kerry, you're in Toronto. Deanna, you are in...
I'm in Chicago, in the windy...
I'm in Washington, D.C., and Jerry's in California. We've got the whole country covered here.
Yes, all the coast. So thank you so much for having us, and thanks to everyone who's watching, because I think our viewers are from across the country as well, which is fabulous. So I am I connected with Jerry through my work as a longtime entrepreneur and the founder of Intercultural Talk. That is a company that was doing intercultural, digital, and real life marketing. I worked primarily with what I call non-digital natives, so people who didn't grow up with technology, but who if they wanted to stay engaged and involved and run businesses, would not grow old without it. So I connected with Jerry through that capacity and have done all kinds of programs, between Jerry actually has got like 1,200 followers across his social media and videos. And so he's really adapted to my helping him know what to do on social media. I also, one thing that's really important in terms of who I am and then how it also applies to the book that we ended up writing, I am very intercultural and multicultural just as a being. I speak 3 different languages. My husband's Brazilian, we're interfaith. And so everything that I do always looks at how you cross just either whether it's generations or cultures or things like that. And that's really what came about in the book we wrote, was looking at that idea of generations really being just completely different cultures. And then one other thing is that not a grandparent, but thankfully I was connected with Jerry because the entire time we were writing the book, I was the mother of a teenager. So when you hear about this voice of the adult child as that conduit between the generations, that's what I was living across the time that Jerry and I were working together.
I love it. All right. Well, now I saved the best for last, not to disparage Kerry or Deanna, but I had the good fortune of meeting and talking to Jerry, and I think you all remember I said, Jerry, I could have you on every week to talk to our community because you've got so much. Your story is just amazing. Jerry, give folks a little bit of your background, and I know this could take the whole hour, but if we can get the Cliff Notes version, I think it'll be a great intro to our discussion.
I'm a native Chicagoan. I graduated from high school in 1946, and I joined the United States Army so I could get the GI Bill and go to college. My family could never afford to send me to college, and I wanted to own my own resident camp where kids came and you took care of them and taught them stuff. And after I graduated with my master's degree in social work, I started working for the Jewish Community Centers of Chicago and worked for them for 47 years. And during those 47 years, I was director of our Camp Shy in Wisconsin for 15 years. And I worked with families throughout my career in JCC. I've been working with teenagers to nursery school kids, and I really worked with the family. And the people I loved to meet were the senior adults who came from Russia and from Germany, and the things, the stories they told, and what I learned, and how critical the family was in Chicago to them. And then the difficulty in relating to their teenage grandchildren who were American and they were from foreign countries. And I learned that when you unload, and when you unload yourself, when you share yourself with your family, with your teenage kids. For instance, my daughter brought me here because she wanted me to be safe from the virus. She said, Dad, you'll only be here for 3 months. Well, it's now almost 3 years. And 7 months ago in April, I moved into assisted living. And that was a whole new experience. And I shared that with my grandchildren. My grandchildren are in Wisconsin, Philadelphia, one in Colorado and one here and stuff like that. How do you stay connected? And it's critical for me to stay connected to my family and to my grandchildren. I asked them when they were in middle school, to share with me every paper they wrote for their teachers, for their classes. And I have one grandson now who's a rabbi, and he shares with me his sermons. So that I said, I wanted to learn from you, and please teach me so I can learn from the papers you write. And I was never critical of their papers. I never checked for spelling and punctuation and all that stuff. What did I learn? And I ended up having several notebooks of all the papers they had. And when I moved, my daughter said, Dad, send all those papers back to them. And my grandson, the rabbi from the pulpit, he's in Philadelphia, he shared with the congregation in a sermon, read your old papers that you write when you were in college. You'll be surprised how terrible they are. And he also commented about how important the faculty people's comments were on his papers. Well, he's in a town where there's several universities, and many of those faculty are in his congregation. They came up to him afterward and thanked him for mentioning the work that they put in to correct and share ideas on papers. So anyway,
Man, I tell you, how you articulated that was absolutely amazing. And I think that it's an important reminder for all of us. I mean, I am still fearful to this day to give my father anything that I've written because I know he will be critical. I think I love how you framed that is that looking at those papers on what you could learn, and what a wonderful gift to have that collection to be able to pass it back to your family members. Before we move to the book and all the great initiatives that you and Deanna are involved with, I want to get a little glimpse in the decision that you made to live in an assisted living, because this is a topic that so many of our audience wrestle with, whether it be themselves or their loved ones. So you had mentioned you moved from Chicago to be closer to your daughter in Los Angeles. And
she brought me to this town
in the pandemic. And then tell us, what was it like making the transition from, I'm assuming, her home? You were living with her in her home, or did you have your own apartment?
I was living with her in her home, and I never had the opportunity to meet people my age because they didn't. Some of them walked down the street, but they were all her friends. And my daughter's 71, and I'm not part of that age group. And so that's why we moved here. I moved here, and it was at the beginning was a lot of sadness. I saw a lot of people that were sad, and many that were happy as well. The key to living here for me was making friends, and the stories that I heard when we sat and talked about our life, what our parents did, what they did, what careers they had, all those kinds of things. And I had to decide that I'm going to be my best friend, because there's times when you're sitting in your apartment and you're alone. Well, do I like myself? What don't I like about myself? So I went through all that, and then I got outside help. I got a psychiatrist that my rabbi here recommended, and she was tremendous. And we spent several sessions talking about adjusting to this place and why it was kind of difficult. And then I met with the management here, and I said, what are the mental health issues of people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s? What are we struggling with mental health-wise? And so she made contact with an organization that sends speakers. This coming Monday, we're having a speaker on legacy. What is the legacy you want to leave? You're leaving for yourself and for your family. Before that, we had a speaker on grief. What is the grief that you experience, and how are you dealing with that grief and sadness? My son is a psychiatrist. He sent me a book on the joy of sadness. The joy of sadness. And the joy of sadness is that my wife passed away, and the joy of thinking about her is that she loved me and I loved her. What a wonderful part to have that in your life. Love and caring. And how do I share that with my grandchildren? How do I share it with my friends? But how do I embrace it for myself? Man. You're going to get me started on lectures.
No, but like I said, and I think
Deanna, you stop me, please.
No. Like I said, I could have you on every week, Jerry. You are just a fountain of great ideas and insights, and thank you for sharing that personal story. And let's dive in to some of the amazing projects that you and Deanna were involved in. And what I want to share on my screen here is I believe this is your main website, Grandparents Unleashed, correct?
It is. If you click on the logo in the upper left, you'll actually go to the homepage for it, if you wanted to, which kind of gives an overview of all the programs.
Okay, there we go.
But
So-
starting with the About Jerry page, you can never go wrong.
yeah.
That's the core to it all.
So maybe as a starting point, just tell us about this initiative and the how it started and how we can use your resources to make the world a better place.
This is the moment where Jerry and I are always quiet to see who wants to go first. I always defer to Jerry, and if things are true, he's going to tell me to go first. But Jerry, what do you want to say?
You go first, Deanna.
Okay. we have that part down. So Jerry and I were introduced by a mutual colleague, actually a woman who was a longtime publicist who was closing her business. And so because you can always get such great advice from people who have done the work, I asked if she would meet with me as my business was beginning. And she said, you have to meet Jerry. So we met originally to help him promote. He had a first book that he had written. So we met for that. And what we found is the most magic thing ever is something called co-creation. You know, as a business owner, I really felt like my role was to go outside, do the work, and then come back and do like a tap show for Jerry to be like, here's everything I did. And what it turned out is that we're amazing co-creators. You know, I like to say 1 + 1 is 1,000. And that's what would happen is this is really great. How do we get it into schools? And Jerry would say, well, I did this program at Deerfield. How do we take that? And now there's actually an online course that grandparents can get that has all the steps to creating a grandparent program at your school. Or yeah, we started with writing stories, and then it was like we partnered with JCC, and there was an online program. We've had 400 grandparents across the country writing stories. Now we're turning it into a card game that families can have. So it just feels like that's what happened is with grandparenting at the core, with Jerry, with that just absolute kindness and curiosity and devotion to making families closer and better and stronger. And then me with like, okay, but how do we say that in 3 words and make it really snap? Those two things together have just exploded into so many programs and continues to just with that openness to ideas and how to help people.
Now, Deanna, would it be helpful for me to bring up the website here and maybe walk us through some of the different programs that you're all involved with?
Sure, absolutely. So, and you can even see the main things are across the top there. The idea of Grandparents Unleashed, that title comes from, that is Jerry's line, which is when grandparents unleash their creativity, the things they're passionate about, and share their wisdom, that they can transform both themselves and their family. So that's where that idea of Grandparents Unleashed comes from. And this idea of creating a culture of teaching and learning. So you've got the school kit,
Okay.
which is, the school program. This actually is 100% kit that you can purchase online. It's an online school program, but these are ready to go modules that schools can use to engage grandparents in the school. So there's a booklet that you can get as well. And Jerry, do you want to talk about, because Jerry, this started in real life, Jerry, with the with your program at Deerfield High School.
Let's hear about the school program.
Mm-hmm.
I started a program at the high school in my neighborhood, and I met with the principal and told her my idea about how do you help grandparents of freshmen coming into school enter their grandchild's world so they can understand what goes on in school. And she said, Jerry, my best friend was my grandmother. So she was on board right away. And what we did was brought grandparents together from whose freshmen are coming to the school. And we had a panel of sophomore kids, boys and girls, that talked about what it was like to be a freshman. And then we had a member of the faculty that was in charge of 75 clubs that kids can join, so that they got a list of all the clubs that the kids could join. Then the head of the English department gave the list of grandparents a copy of all the books the kids would read in the 4 years they're in school. So I could read To Kill a Mockingbird because my grandchild was going to read that, and then we could discuss it. So we met with the person in charge of the psychology department, the social work department, and she said, what are the emotional issues that freshmen have growing up in our school? The friendship issues, the cyberbullying, which was a new phrase for us. What does that mean? Well, kids take their cell phone, they take pictures of kids, then they send a message to 25 of their friends saying, didn't she look ugly today? Or he had his shirt tails out, or whatever. So that we entered their world. And then I wanted my grandchildren to enter my world. What was I going through? And I brought a couple of them here to where I am living now, assisted living, and they toured with me. They saw where I live. They saw the people. They saw my apartment. And we talked about, Grandpa, what is it like for you to live there? And I explained what I was doing. When I was camp director, I met an old forest ranger that said, always teach your staff and your campers to leave your campsite better than you found it. Okay, how do I leave where I'm living now better than I found it? So I created the idea of the mental health issues. I created the idea, how do we bring music into this place? And how do we give that people have a lot of time on their hands? What do they want to play an instrument? And some people played the piano when they were kids. Well, there's a piano here. Let's have, and so we're going to find faculty who will teach people what they want to play. And then we started a choral group. We got 14 people signed up for a choral group now. So how do I leave where I live here better than I found it? And my grandson, the rabbi, said, Grandpa, I say, how do I leave the world better than I found it? And so you share phrases, you share ideas, you share values. My last thing, and I'll stop, I created a value of the meaning of money when my kids were just started high school. And I gave them 4 jars. And one jar says spend, another jar save, another jar charity, and another jar investment. And I gave them $20 a month in singles so they could put money in the jars. And they decided, and I worked this all out with my adult children beforehand. I never give a new idea until I clear it with my adult children. And they agreed to it. In fact, they helped me do a better job of planning how to do that. And so that when I would talk with my grandchildren, what are you doing with the savings jar? Your mother's birthday is coming up. Oh, gosh, that's right. I didn't remember that. And so we have discussions about what money means. Grandpa, when I take my spending jar, I always want to go to the shop with my mother and buy clothes. That was a granddaughter that said that. Guys don't buy clothes. Okay, I'm sorry.
No, that's great. And actually, Jerry, you brought up a discussion topic that we had on Careys when Kerry and I had our first discussion on grandparenting is communicating. It's one thing to communicate with your grandchildren, but navigating the communication with their parents can sometimes be more challenging, right, Kerry?
Yes, and especially when you're at a distance. And so the kind of times that you get to talk are fleeting, or, when you want to talk to the adult children, there are children in your grandchildren in the background. So it is hard. And I think that's why when you have in-person visits, it's such a good time to, as Jerry just said, run an idea by them to see what they think, and to and also gives them ownership of it too, if you're doing it together and they get to have some input.
No, I don't know, Steve, if you want to, I don't want to pre-jump this, but maybe it's a cue for when we go there. The relationship with the adult child, the parents, is so important that in a 9-chapter book, 2 of the chapters are actually about that relationship. Because our idea is you don't get to skip a generation. So there's the whole thing of boundaries, there's boundaries, there's being allies, there's if forgiveness, if there's been a bad relationship, you actually have to make the effort to repair that. So yes, that adult child relationship, not only is it critical for the grandparent, but what I have found as the adult child is that when the adult child works to bring the grandparents and the grandchildren closer, the whole family is rewarded, because grandparents are going to tell the grandkids stories they never told you, because there was too much of the no, I have to teach lessons. They let it all out with the grandkids, and the parents says
Now the book. This is a great segue. The book that you co-authored is called "Where Two Worlds Meet: A Guide to Connecting with Your Teenage Grandchild." I got to stop sharing there. I want you to dive into this, but I can tell you, as a parent who has raised children from birth to now, one that's going to be 20 years old, the teenager is very unique. And so it doesn't surprise, I think it's a good strategy to create a book specifically on communicating with teenagers. How did this idea come about?
Wait, Steve, would it be helpful to show the video real quick, just so people have context for what the book is about?
Okay, so let's click over here, and then just for folks, if you want to check this out on your own, you click on Where Two Worlds Meet, and then there is a video here that I'm going to play for everybody, and then we can continue chatting. I also want to remind our audience, if you've got questions or comments, feel free to just type those in the comment box or the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen.
When grandchildren are young, a sweet treat is enough to inspire their adoration. Then your grandchildren grow up. Suddenly, they are teenagers, and it's not so easy. Where Two Worlds Meet starts with the teenage years, a time when your grandchildren are discovering who they want to be as independent beings in the world. It's an action-focused guide to stay connected and even deepen your relationship with your grandchildren as you both age. Beyond meeting them where they are, true connection means understanding their world, their school experience, their music, their technology. And you want to invite them into your world too, to share values and leave a legacy. When grandparents and grandchildren connect, the family becomes stronger and closer across all three generations. This book gives you the roadmap. Where Two Worlds Meet, a guide to connecting with your teenage grandchildren.
Steve, I want to interject here that the grandchildren are not our children. They belong to their parents, so that we don't have the right to take over and do things with them without the approval of their parents. They are not our children. The parents are our children, at least one of them is.
Your statements are so great, Jerry. I think a lot of the calls that I get are families in turmoil over sort of differing opinions and how, my grandchildren are being raised by my son or my daughter, and going in with that attitude, I think, is very important.
So Steve, you had asked how we ended up focusing in on teenagers, and that's really important. So initially, there were two reasons initially, and this is pre-pandemic, and that it's important to note. Initially, it's because there's so many books out there. When the kids are young, you can do crafts, you can go to the train museum, there's so many things that are amazed about. And it actually happens, there's brain science, we talk about this, that the science actually shows that when kids are 12, their brains start to change, where their emotional centers are on track, but your logic centers of your brain don't become fully developed until actually, now it says it's like 26. So basically what happens is, and at the same time, the studies show that grandchildren, 12-year-olds, teens, they're freaked out as well. They don't understand what's happening to them. So at the time when they need you the most, when they need constancy the most, is the same time that they're becoming more and more difficult. Difficult to us, that was an adult word. They are becoming more developmentally normative to reach out more to their friends, to look more to their peer group. In fact, just one quick thing, which I love, because I've been doing this work with Jerry, the first time my son looked at me, he goes, "I hate you, mommy." I looked at him and I go, "Oh, you're being developmentally normative." it just broke everything. But then after we started the book, we finished it during the pandemic. So it went from it's hard to being from grandparents have to do whatever they can, no matter what their grandkids say to them. They've got to stay in the game because their grandkids need them more than ever, even as it appears that they're pushing away. So we really felt a cause to what we were doing as we continued to write it.
And my wife told me that when she was 15, she developed a double D dress cup.
Jerry, how does that fit into our story? See, I have to. I guess that was difficult for her.
Yes. Well, the whole growing up, sexuality. Grandparents have been through that. You raised your adult children through that, and now you have an opportunity to explore that world with your grandchild.
Mm-hmm. Which, though, body image and how people are feeling about themselves is really critical at this age. And Steve, you said people call you about this stage being difficult. This is something really important because parents, grandparents often will say, "I just can't wait till my grandchild just goes back to their old self." Here's the thing to remember. The teenage years is when they're actually figuring out who they are as independent beings in the world, because them going back to their old selves, are you saying you want them to be a 9-year-old? It doesn't make sense. And they are going to have ideas that are different than your own. What's great with Jerry, which is also why we focus so much on the teenage years, is Jerry's ability to ask questions and open, to not get tied to the idea because it's different than your own, but to ask about the idea, to understand where it's coming from.
Love it. And
when they ask you about questions about you, you share honestly and openly. Yeah, I flunked when I was in school. I flunked second grade. Oh, Grandpa, you flunked? Yes, I did.
And I think also remembering that, and just coming back to kind of the issues that kids are facing today and your grandchildren are facing are really different because they are happening in a swirl of social media, Snapchat, Instagram, like talk about, body image, higher, ability to be bullied, just as because of what you wore to school that day, that it doesn't just last for the kind of day that you went to school, but continues on for weeks sometimes for these kids. So I have my 12-year-old niece here right now, and it is a education on a daily basis about what a young, almost teenage girl is facing today.
I love it. Questions and comments are coming in, and I want to jump on those. But before we do that, one of the things that I like to do with the book authors, just to give a glimpse at the book, here's the table of contents, which you can get on Amazon. I'm just gonna kind of, hopefully folks can see the various chapters. It's broken down into 10 chapters. Bring the whole self to the relationship, bridge the generations, tell stories, give voice to your values, host family meetings, plan to connect, navigate interdependence with your adult children, practice forgiveness, and create a legacy now. I know because we've been chatting for quite some time. Any specific chapters that you'd like to sort of spotlight here, or thoughts that you'd like to delve into based on the table of contents there?
Well, I love the chapter that we've written on values. How do you share values with your grandchildren? And I talked about money, how I brought that to be a part of the value system because money is so important in our life. And there are other examples. Maybe Deanna, you can think of one quickly.
Mm. Well, actually, on the values chapter itself, there's actually it's almost like a family values quiz. And so it's a way to actually write down all the different values, whether it's environmentalism or multiculturalism or charity, and then how to turn those values into activities. Because you find, particularly with a teenager, if you say, let's sit down and talk about values, that's going to be hard. If you go to the botanic garden together, you can talk about spirituality. Did God create this, or is it nature? Is it the environment? So there's a lot with that with values. Jerry, one of my favorite I always love is the chapter on storytelling because it's a game changer. Jerry, what happens when you tell people, like, say, how was school today?
Say that again, please.
Well, just the whole idea of asking your grandchildren, how was school? What's your advice on turning that around?
Never ask them how was school today, because you're going to get, and then you ask, what did you learn today in school? And you get nothing. School is terrible. The teacher is ugly, blah, 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 blah. What did you learn in school, Grandpa? And then we have a discussion in my one-room school where I grew up in. And they say, yeah, right, Grandpa. I was by your high school one time, remember?
But that idea of saying, tell me a story about school, instead of just saying, how was school? It's amazing. We've taken the whole story thing from the chapter in the book on how to tell stories. So now we're turning it into a story card game. It's amazing because on the story chapter, my son had a terrible first date. It was awful. Like, the girls made him spend $20 on popcorn and then wouldn't sit with them. And it was awful. He came to me and I wanted to call the other girl's mom, which is totally inappropriate. He was able to share that story. And then my dad had a funny story about a first blind date with Sally Frankenstein. So that's where stories are amazing. I did see someone had mentioned talk more about the legacy, and I jumped really quickly to stories. Do you want to go back? Because there is a whole chapter on specific ideas on how to leave a legacy.
No, you go ahead, Deanna.
Well, I tell you what, let's address some of the comments,
Okay.
questions that are coming in, and I think we can weave it into some of the chapters of the article of the book.
Can I just jump in? Because I think that one of the questions is a great question, and it highlights my favorite part about this book. And so I have it, and I didn't read it from start to finish. I kind of open it and then read what's called the letters from grandchildren, because they make me cry. And then I can sort of read everything around it. And so Beth had said she'd love to hear the grandkids talk about, how all the cool things that Jerry did influence them. What strikes me about the book is that there are so many grandchildren who are like 19, all the way to an 80-year-old talking about her own grandmother, about how they were influenced. And the one story that I love, and it's the food chapter, not because I'm a magnificent cook, but he talks about going to visit his grandfather in New Delhi and how he only saw him once a year, but that they would eat chocolate together. And, and they didn't speak the same language. And so that was a limitation. But what strikes me is just the power of that. They found a way to communicate. And to this day, when he eats chocolate, he thinks about his grandfather. And so I think the ways that we are all able to engage with one another now because of technology, there's just a real, the book gives you hope that, your grandchildren will know you and will remember you and will have these wonderful stories. And so I think you guys recommend to get grandchildren to write letters to their grandparents. Because as I was reading through it, I was thinking, wouldn't it be nice for the grandparents to read that?
Well, we urge grandparents to ask their grandchildren, what have you learned from Grandma? What have you learned from me, Grandpa? And they say, ask them to write a letter. That's the old-fashioned way. I say, well, then text a message, whatever.
Actually, one of my favorite letters in the book is from Jerry's grandson, Benny, because Benny was 17 when he wrote it. He spends the entire letter telling his grandpa why asking him to write a letter was a bad idea and didn't make sense.
Oh, I love
Only
that.
only in the conclusion to say, what I hope I get from this is the ability to have a conviction and to pursue and persevere on something that you believe in strongly. So he wrote the whole thing, and that was the essence of Jerry in terms of a value. That's a favorite.
I love it. Emily says, while they're not our children, if we are helping raise them, how do we discern what's ours and what's theirs? That's going back to this communication conflict. Any sort of thoughts or words of wisdom for Emily that might be challenged in this area?
Well, one is that she has that discussion with her adult children. That's where that belongs. And if there's a conflict there, she get outside help on how to deal with her family and around that. And there may be places she should stay away from because it's going to cause great conflict. She may find doors that are open and how to open doors further. But you sometimes need outside help in getting at these issues.
Mm.
Yeah.
Along those lines, we had talked about the idea of trust, just how to manage or have those conversations. So there are ways to approach it and figure out their sample conversations. But Jerry wanted to have that conversation with his adult children about if or when to keep a secret, because he always felt like there should be absolutely positively no secrets between grandparents and grandchildren that the parents don't know. He heard from a lot of grandparents that said, but they need us. We want to make sure they have someone to turn to. How do you know? And so Jerry had that conversation with his adult children. When do you want to know? When is a secret okay?
And my adult children said, if they're talking about suicide, if they're talking about drugs, if they're talking about they stole something and they want to tell you those secrets, that you tell us immediately. I had a conversation with my grandchildren. I told them what subjects we can talk about and then what I have to share with their parents. And I told them that I'll give you a few hours and then I'll help you share that with your parents, so that I was still there to help them deal with their parents.
That's great. Rosie, I love this statement that she shares. She says, my preschool grandchildren call me the Amazon Alexa. A couple of times a week, they call to talk to me. However brief it can be, it's the highlight of my week. It's a low threshold way to keep in touch at a long distance. I think my mom has a similar element in that my kids reach out to her from time to time. It's not every day. It could be every other week or once a month, but she cherishes that time and she makes it so positive. And I think, Rosie, you sort of remind us all that be careful on your demands and how much and what your expectations are.
You should never make demands on your grandchildren.
That's great. I know that a lot of demands are being made on this, so this is a good reminder. Let's see, Emily says, sometimes we can be supportive when the parents cannot be. An example is the identity issue, especially.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that ties into the judgment thing, but also what you were just talking about in terms of meeting grandchildren where they are. We have certain expectations. I saw the thing in the chat, which now I got to look at them between okay, thumbs up, punctuation. There is, and the easiest way to know what things mean is actually to ask and to have a laugh when there's mistakes that are made. When you finally get grandchildren on the phone, when it is hard, that's where that idea of tell me a story or you're reading what they're reading. Because the worst thing you can do when you finally get your child on the phone is to say, why haven't you called me? That is just a non-starter. If you completely, if you just dive in with, oh, you're reading To Kill a Mockingbird, what do you think about that? Start with the topic. That's that whole idea of bringing your whole self to the relationship. You're going to have to be vulnerable. And if you're thinking, well, why do I have to be the one who has to be vulnerable? Because you're the one who wants to really make this relationship the best that it can be.
I love it. Anne says, I'd like to hear more from Kerry about long distance grandparenting. And I want to just throw up Kerry's website here on the screen so everybody can see it, the longdistancegrandparent.com. Kerry, the topics that we're talking about are sort of distance inclusive or exclusive, however we should frame it. But one of the things that I think that has happened is that because we communicate so much on these things, you're sort of communicating with your grandchild like they're a long distance grandchild, even if they're right down the street.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, and please do head over to my website. It's just the longdistancegrandparent.com, and you can click on the blog just to get you started. I'm not sure what age your grandchildren are, but I tend to share ideas for actually across all ages. You can sign up for the weekly emails that I send, and they usually just include a quick tip or idea. But I do address issues like partnering with the parents, some of the preparation that you can do as a grandparent to have more meaningful conversations. I think that, when we look at moving from, I have an online membership program, and it's for grandparents who are trying to stay connected to grandchildren ages 2 to 10. And some of the grandparents, because the program's been around now for a couple of years, their grandchildren are getting older. So hopefully we'll have the Long Distance Grandparent Society 3.0 to address some of the teenage issues. But I will say, Steve, that in terms of technology, like this is the thing where, you go through the parents to a certain age and then they get their own device. And for some grandparents, that is wonderful because it opens up a whole new way to communicate with them. And if you do get to chat with them and talk to them on the phone, whatever it is, whatever age they are, I always encourage you to write thank you for your time notes. Like we want to teach our kids to appreciate being with people, talking to people. And so you can do that by modeling, right? Kids learn so much, teenagers learn so much through the modeling behavior. So even if you're frustrated because you never get a thank you card back, if you gave them something, for the holiday season and you haven't heard from them, but you got to talk to them, send them a short note, right? It was wonderful to hear your voice. It doesn't have to be a great big long letter, but it's just a touch point with them. So those are just a few tips off the top of my head.
You know what? I just read a comment, and I have to bring this up because it's a technology one. Marianne says, just talking to kids about punctuation rules for texts is great. How younger kids interpret a period or an exclamation point as negatives. Okay. They mean all different things. What is absolutely amazing, my wife and I are still in the dinosaur ages in our vernacular using text messages. My mom texts to my kids like she has cracked the code, and it's all the bad grammar, the stuff that drives us all crazy. But when they write papers, they are generally following grammar rules, but the whole text language, which builds trust. I think that my mom has more trust in her communication with my kids because she speaks their language on devices. Anyways, I guess that was more of just a thought. Thanks, Marianne, for that.
Marianne, we all loved your comment, and we are almost everyone writing down. Go check out what is the difference. I'm going to go ask my niece.
I know, totally. I want to know. And I put exclamation points on everything. I would say that what's kind of fun now that things are reopening with COVID, I know the local library near Deerfield or near Skokie, where Jerry was, they would have 8th graders come in and do, it was actually really fun. They would do a lab for older adults, a tech lab, and you could go in and ask anything. And they had 8th graders who volunteered from the local school. So you can ask your own grandchildren what those things mean, or see if there's something at your local library where you can just go in and ask other kids what those are.
Great.
But, and the other thing, and this goes with this idea of the texting, don't underestimate, even though for us or for the grandparent, that doesn't feel like real communication. For the teen, it does. And so don't underestimate, Jerry tells a story of a woman who texts her grandchild every day, morning, sweetie, love you. And the grandchild texts back, love you, Grams. And that little thing, that constancy for the grandchild is huge. And don't underestimate like what it means for them. The only thing I would say is if you call, I think people know this, don't leave voicemails. Like nobody listens to voicemail. So don't leave a voicemail. Don't ask if they listened to your voicemail. They did not. Okay. So
let's see. Carla asked if we could talk a little bit more about leaving a legacy, which, as you can see on the table of contents, is chapter 9. Can we elaborate a little bit on some ideas or thoughts on leaving a legacy? I think, Jerry, you've really shared a couple of, just in the ways that you communicated with your kids and grandchildren. I can see a lot of different ways that you've left a great legacy, but any additional thoughts on that might help Carla?
Well, that was not my favorite chapter, so Deanna, you can respond to that one.
actually, no.
I believe you live your life and you share your values, and you don't impose yourself on your family or your grandkids, and you just help them grow, and you continue to grow yourself. You continue to learn and invest in learning and sharing and storytelling. That is the joy of when I sit back and think of age 95. What have I left myself? What have I left my family? What am I leaving them? And then I think of each individual and how do I help them stay connected? I created the Witkovsky Living Legacy Foundation, and it's made up of board of directors of all the cousins. They receive requests for funds. One grandchild needed money to go to Mexico, in the border between Texas and Mexico, because he was studying the problem there. And he wrote them the request for the money. They all voted yes. Grandpa, you can give him $1,000 so he can go. But they stay connected through what they're doing with each other, so that the relationship is strong. They know when my one granddaughter moved to Chicago and she couldn't find a job, one cousin wrote back to her saying, "Boy, I know that stuff. I had to go through that. And you may want to try blah, 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 blah." And well, they stay connected. And that's what I'm so proud about. That's my legacy. How do I keep them? But how do I do things that I'm passionate about, I'm committed to, and I unlock my creativity, and I unlock the creativity in Deanna and me together so we can create. That is the exciting part of our relationship.
And what Jerry talked about, and I wouldn't gloss over, the Witkovsky Living Legacy Foundation was brilliant. Jerry's got a phrase that says, "Don't die until you're dead." And people would always talk about their legacy as though after I die, such and such will happen. And he was like, well, why do I have to wait till I die? Why not do something now? And so it's not a foundation in the traditional sense. It's something that he created where, as he said, it's all the cousins and siblings and grandkids. They're the only people on the board. They can request things for funding that relate to, in his case, you create your own rules. They were related to education, career, things like that. And then they decide. Grandparents are not allowed to veto it. Once they decide, they go to grandpa and grandpa funds it. It does not have to be a ton of money. It can, you probably have to set rules if you have a lot of grandchildren, but it's a brilliant program. And just even say, we did it. I was no grandkid yet. I actually loved it so much that I created it in my own family for my one son, because you talk about how do you get people to talk about what they're doing. If they get a grant from the Living Legacy Foundation, one of the rules is you have to come back and you have to teach the whole family something at a family meeting. And so it's a way that you're invested in what your grandchild's doing, but then they also have to tell you all about it and you get all the excitement of it. It's a brilliant program and really in detail. That's what that chapter is about, is how to set up your own.
Holy cow! And I love it. And Jerry, and I want to recognize our audience that's on LinkedIn. Let's see, it's Rafaela. She says, I really love Jerry's history. I could listen to him all day. And I tend to agree with and hello to everybody who's on LinkedIn there. I got to remember to always tap in to y'all. We're getting close to the top of the hour here. Let's see, it's, what do we have here? It says, Marianne says, for many of our children, young adults, or even much older, a daily or nightly or random out of the blue to say, I love you and I'm thinking and praying or grateful for you is appreciated. And, you know, it's never been easier to do that with text messages. And it's hard for us to understand because we feel like you need to hear that from somebody's voice, but the text is just as powerful. And Rich Carlson, hey Rich, sharing where their great-grandparents grew up, in my case Sweden, and if possible, visiting those countries and neighborhoods can provide a deeper appreciation of a grandchildren's family history. I highly recommend it. Yeah, you know, we should, maybe, Kerry, we should do a whole discussion on traveling with your grandchildren, because what Rich is bringing up is just another amazing way to share our legacy.
But you can travel to these places by going online and doing a tour. I went online and I served in Kobe, Japan, and I went online and I got Kobe, Japan on the screen, and they did a tour through parts of Kobe, Japan. How do you use the technology that Terry's talking about to do those kind of trips? And you can do them through a family Zoom call by bringing on Sweden and then go through it together.
I love it. Yeah, Jerry, you probably remember when you would have the slideshows, the carousel, and the big screen in the living room. Yeah. Now we can do this all over the world with Zoom, and that's absolutely amazing. Thanks, Rich, for that suggestion there. You know, Gail Crockett also brings up, because a lot of what we're talking about is technology and getting on the same page as our grandchildren. And if you are nervous or feel like you need some coaching in that area, Gail brings up seniorplanet.org. Seniorplanet and getsetup.org both have amazing, easy classes to learn about all of the different digital technology, and you're doing it with your peers. And they have, I've talked to many people that have gone to those courses, and they're very helpful.
But the first thing you do is you ask your grandchild, I'm having this kind of problem with my computer, come on over and fix it for me.
Yep. We've all got great resources, and that can be great. Okay, I can't believe how fast this hour went. This was absolutely amazing. I want to give y'all the opportunity for some final words and remind everybody I recorded this. We'll also have a transcript of the chat, and it'll be on our website later this afternoon. But any sort of parting words for y'all?
I just, as the co-host, I just want to end with, I love this book, and I think that the other thing to remember is that, and I'm going to go do this, is I'm going to write a review of it, because I know that really helps. It's a weird world where you can buy it and it's almost like it didn't happen unless you wrote a review about it. And so it's just full of such golden nuggets. So thank you both for writing this book and addressing a topic that is of great interest to a lot of grandparents I know.
Terry, thank you, and Steve for being here and adding and asking questions and helping us do, I think, a pretty good presentation. Deanna, thank you very much for being here from Chicago.
My pleasure. And thank you so much for this. Just to add on to Kerry as well, that the book's available as an audiobook too. So if you're not a reader, you can get an audio. It's fabulous. And just one final thing. So Jerry is Jerry is the most inspirational person to me. It's like the idea I call it rocket aging. It's this idea that life is a trajectory and that you just keep like living, learning, and contributing across the lifespan. And Jerry's just a role model and amazing in the way that he does that. And I'm just excited to be a partner with him and to be along for that ride for sure.
Man, and here's one promise that I want from both of you is if Jerry's going to be on a podcast and he's going to be speaking, if he is doing anything, make sure to send me a note because I want to add it to our calendar. I knew this was going to be the case. You've heard from the people there. We could listen to you every day, Jerry. What you're doing is such an inspiration, and I really appreciate all of you being here today. And I also, as always, the audience is what really makes this. The questions and your comments really are what makes these unbelievable dynamic conversations.
But you also promised me, Steve, that you would help Deanna and I know where we didn't do a good job here and what you like what we did.
Yeah, absolutely. We can have a little.
And Terry, we're going to throw you into that too.
Recap huddle. I love it. All right. Well, folks, we're going to have a discussion tomorrow. But again, thanks so much. And everybody have a great new year.